The 2022 Oscars were eagerly awaited, as they are every year. Fans were excited to see their favorite stars, while Hollywood's elite paraded in luxurious outfits and gleaming smiles under the intense lights and relentless camera flashes. I was there like many others, but my role was different. I wasn't there to be seen or to applaud. I was just a production assistant, an invisible cog in the gigantic machine that kept the show running. However, that night, something felt different. A disturbing sensation loomed in the air, as if something much darker was unfolding behind the glimmering lights. As soon as I entered the Dolby Theater, I felt a weight in the air unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. It wasn't physical, but a presence, a sense that the air around me was denser, as if the shadows in the corners of the theater were deeper and darker than usual. I took a deep breath and tried to ignore the discomfort, thinking it was just the nerves of being at such a grand event. Yet, something in the atmosphere suggested that the whispers and murmurs I heard backstage weren't just trivial gossip. The faces of the guests passing by were smiling, but there was a strange coldness in their eyes, an indifference I couldn't understand. It was as if they knew something I didn't, something terrible hovering over the event. Or maybe they knew, but didn't dare speak about it. The entertainment industry, after all, is full of secrets. But what would happen that night would go far beyond a simple rumor or a scandal hushed up by the media. It would be something that echoed for a long time. Outside, the night in Los Angeles was mild, with a light breeze blowing occasionally. But inside the theater, the chill I felt was different. It wasn't caused by air conditioning, but by a sensation that passed through me, something that seemed profoundly wrong. With every step I took through the backstage corridors, the hairs on my arms stood on end, as if I were being watched by something that didn't belong in that place. The stage lights seemed dimmer, as though the surrounding shadows were slowly consuming the illumination. I looked around, trying to see if anyone else felt what I was feeling. But the conversations among the technicians remained lively, laughter echoed through the walls, and everything seemed as usual. Yet, there was a noticeable tension in the air, something even the laughter couldn't mask. As I approached the stage, I passed by some of the sound and lighting technicians. They were whispering among themselves, seeming more nervous than usual. "Did you feel that?" One of them asked, his eyes wide. "I've never seen anything like this in all these years." The other technician nodded, and the expression on his face reflected a fear I couldn't fully understand. What did they know that I didn't? The Oscars have always had their share of curious stories. Legends of superstitions, curses, and strange events from past editions circulate among those who work behind the scenes. But what was about to happen that night would surpass any urban legend. Something much older and more malevolent was approaching, and all of us, even if unconsciously, would witness something truly horrific. I looked at the main stage as the preparations for the ceremony continued. The presenters were being positioned, and the awards, aligned and gleaming, were ready to be handed out. Everything seemed impeccable, perfect as always. Yet, the feeling of unease within me only grew stronger. Something was definitely out of place, even though I couldn't yet pinpoint exactly what it was. As I walked through the backstage, trying to find something that could explain this strange feeling, a disturbing thought began to form in my mind. What if this sense of discomfort was more than just pre-event anxiety? What if something truly sinister was about to happen? Before I could dwell further on these thoughts, the sound of applause and the brightening of the stage lights interrupted my train of thought. The ceremony was about to begin, and with it, a real nightmare. Backstage, as the ceremony progressed, something seemed to change in the dynamic of the place. The laughter I had heard before the event started was replaced by an unsettling silence. I looked around and noticed that people were moving more hurriedly, their eyes quickly diverting as if avoiding eye contact with something invisible. A chill ran down my spine as I approached a group of technicians who seemed to be having an extremely tense conversation. "I've heard about this before, but I never thought it was true," one of them murmured, his back to me. The other technician, wide-eyed, nodded quickly. "There have always been stories about ancient ceremonies, about pacts made behind the scenes. But this is different. The beast has never appeared in public like this." When I heard the word beast, my heart raced. It didn't seem like an ordinary conversation about some Hollywood big shot. It felt like something much deeper, something laden with a mystical and terrifying weight. "You felt it, didn't you?" Another technician whispered, nervous. The air, it changed since Smith came in. There was something about him, something in his eyes. I couldn't help but move even closer, trying to catch every word. It was surreal to hear a conversation about something so obscure at one of the world's biggest events. But they spoke with a certainty that made me believe they knew something the public could never imagine. I remembered old stories that circulated at Hollywood parties. Once, a producer told me that some of the biggest movie stars had made pacts to achieve success and fame. Sacrifices, rituals. I always thought these were exaggerations meant to scare the newcomers. But now, those words seemed to ring with more truth. With each passing moment, the air grew heavier, as if something invisible was watching us, something hungry. At that point, I didn't know if I was being paranoid or if something truly out of the ordinary was happening. I decided to step away from the technicians, but the feeling that something terrible was about to happen followed me like a shadow. No matter where I looked, the darkness seemed to move on its own, as if it were alive. The theater, which had always been a symbol of glitz and glory, now felt like a dark cavern, ready to swallow everything and everyone. I tried to push these thoughts away and focus on my work. I had responsibilities that night, and I couldn't allow myself to be distracted by superstitions or strange whispers. Yet, no matter how hard I tried, the murmurs and the name Beast echoed in my mind. Who is this entity? And why did it seem like everyone backstage was aware of its presence? Something bigger was happening, something I didn't fully understand. With every passing minute, the idea that something sinister was unfolding felt more real. I began to realize that what was happening wasn't a coincidence. The behavior of the people, the heavy atmosphere, the evasive glances, everything seemed to be part of a puzzle I was slowly piecing together. I approached one of the exits backstage, where the fresh Los Angeles air still seemed normal, free from the oppression dominating the theater's interior. I took a moment to breathe deeply, trying to calm my racing heart. But even there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And somehow, I knew that moment was very close. Before I could react or try to find a rational explanation, the sound of laughter echoed through the theater. It was Chris Rock stepping onto the stage. For a brief moment, the dark atmosphere seemed to lift, and the people around me began to relax. But the sense of unease didn't leave me. It was as if I were the only one who could sense that the night was about to turn into a true nightmare. When Chris Rock walked up to the stage, it should have been just another of the many comedic moments of the night. He was known for his sharp jokes, his ability to turn any situation into something hilarious. The audience was ready to laugh, eagerly awaiting his punchlines. However, as he began to speak, the atmosphere that had briefly stabilized started to shift again. I was backstage, watching the monitor, and something about the screen looked different. The colors, the sound, everything seemed slightly distorted, as if reality itself was warping around us. When Rock started making his jokes, everything seemed normal at first. He teased the actors as usual, and the laughter echoed through the theater. But then, he made the comment about Jada. And in that exact second, I felt the air around me become heavier, denser. I could see, even from a distance, the change on Will Smith's face. Just moments earlier, he had been smiling, but now his expression twisted into something I couldn't explain. It wasn't just anger. There was something deeper, as if something ancient and fierce had awakened inside him. As Smith stood up from his chair, the entire theater seemed to freeze. People kept laughing, unaware of what was about to happen, but I felt it. Something was different. The air turned icy, as if an invisible force had drained all the warmth from the room. I looked around, expecting to see the same reaction from those near me, but it seemed like no one else noticed. No one except me. When Will Smith walked toward Chris Rock, what initially seemed like an impulsive act quickly turned into something much more sinister. With every step he took, I felt the space around him subtly fold in on itself. The shadows seemed to move with him, like an extension of his very being. And when he finally reached the stage, something in the air seemed to crack like muffled thunder. Something invisible to most, but audible to those who knew what to listen for. The slap. The sound reverberated through the theater like a surreal clap of thunder, but it wasn't the sound that terrified me. It was what I saw in Chris Rock's eyes. The moment Will's hand struck him, Rock's eyes seemed to go blank for just a brief second. Something flickered in them, fear perhaps? But there was more than that. It was as if, for a moment, he had seen something no one else in the theater could. And then Will Smith's face. His eyes. They were no longer the same. The characteristic glow of a famous actor had vanished, replaced by something hollow, almost monstrous. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just Will Smith on stage. Something else was there, a presence that transcended the physical world. Something terrible had manifested through that act. While the entire theater held its breath, trying to process what had just happened, I felt an invisible force pushing me back. It was as if the very air around me was alive, pulsing with malevolent energy. The nervous laughter that followed from the audience seemed out of place, absurd, as if no one there was aware of what had truly just occurred. They had seen only a slap, but I had seen something much worse. Backstage, the silence was absolute. No one knew what to do. All eyes were glued to the monitors, and the expressions on the technicians' faces reflected pure confusion and fear. I tried to step back, but the feeling of being watched by something invisible continued to suffocate me. The shadow I had seen earlier now seemed even closer, more tangible. The slap was only the beginning. Something more was coming. In the corridors around me, a strange sound began to echo. It was low, almost imperceptible, but it wasn't human. It was footsteps, heavy and slow, as if something gigantic were walking through the backstage area. My muscles tensed in pure terror. I knew I was in the presence of something much older and much more malevolent than anyone there could have imagined. When the sound of the slap echoed through the theater, the world seemed to freeze. What had lasted only a second in reality felt like an eternity in my mind. That sharp sound reverberated not only through the ears of those present, but also in something deeper, as if it had resonated in the very soul of the theater, shaking the foundations of something ancient and forgotten. I remember feeling my body freeze, my eyes locked on the monitor backstage, unable to look away. Something terrible had just been unleashed. Chris Rock's face, once relaxed and playful, froze into a strange, almost unnatural expression. His eyes, which had glowed with the warmth of comedy moments before, suddenly glazed over, as if he were seeing something beyond the stage, something no one else could. I saw that look for just a second, but it was enough to understand that he wasn't merely surprised or shocked. He was terrified, but not by the slap, not by Will Smith. It was something far bigger, something invisible to everyone else. The air around the stage grew thick, almost suffocating. It was as if an unseen presence had taken over everything, seeping into the shadows, sliding through the dark corners of the theater, watching, waiting. I couldn't describe what was happening, but the temperature had dropped drastically. While everyone in the audience still seemed unsure whether to laugh, applaud, or sit in shock, I knew deep down that I had witnessed something supernatural. Will Smith's face was empty. The casual smile he had worn before stepping onto the stage had completely vanished, replaced by an expression I could only describe as inhuman. His eyes were dark, devoid of any light of life. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was something that went beyond human emotion. I knew in that moment that the slap wasn't merely the impulsive act of an angry man. It was something ritualistic, an ancient and malevolent gesture. As he walked back from the stage, still with that same vacant expression, a strange sound echoed around me. It was low, deep, almost inaudible, like the distant roar of a beast. For a brief moment, I felt a pressure in my ears, as if the air around us had changed, as if we were all submerged in an alternate reality. A shiver ran down my spine. It was the beast. There was no other explanation. It was there, among us, and I could feel its hungry presence. The next few seconds felt like an eternity. Chris Rock, still standing on the stage, rubbed his face and forced a laugh. "Will Smith just slapped me," he exclaimed, trying to ease the tension. But something was wrong. His voice sounded different, as if he were trying to conceal a deep fear, a realization he didn't want to accept. His eyes, for brief moments, kept staring into the void in front of him, as if he were seeing something invisible to the rest of us. The stage, once vibrant and full of life, now felt like a sacrificial altar. I could see the reflection of the lights on the floor, distorted, as if the theater had been enveloped by a layer of darkness that only I could perceive. I looked around, trying to find someone, anyone, who seemed to notice what was happening. But people were confused, some nervously laughing, others whispering among themselves, but no one else seemed to grasp the gravity of what had just occurred. Backstage, the silence was crushing. The technical crew, normally so active and focused, stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the monitors, unsure of what to do. One of the camera operators next to me muttered something, but I couldn't understand him. He seemed to be in a state of shock. Maybe he too had felt that presence, that growing darkness that seemed to swallow the air around us. I wanted to say something, to shout, to run, but my legs felt glued to the floor. Then it hit me. The slap wasn't just an act of violence, an explosion of pent-up rage. It was a crack in reality. Something had been unleashed, something that had been dormant for a long time, patiently waiting for its moment to break free. And that gesture, that slap, was the catalyst. It was as if an invisible barrier had shattered, allowing the beast to infiltrate our reality in a more tangible way. From that moment on, everything felt out of place. The theater, which had once been a symbol of glamour and celebration, now seemed more like a chamber of horrors. I knew deep down that this night would mark the beginning of something terrible, something that no one there could fully understand. And as Will Smith returned to his seat, with that same vacant look, the beast followed him, like a shadow, a hungry entity that wasn't satisfied with just the chaos of that moment. As the event continued, the atmosphere inside the theater became increasingly oppressive. The audience tried to move on, as if everything had been just an isolated incident, but there was undeniably something wrong in the air. I watched from afar, still paralyzed by the strange feeling that something more was about to happen. The lights, which had once shone brightly over the stage, now seemed dimmer, almost as if the shadows were growing and swallowing the very illumination. The feeling of being watched never left me. There was something else present in that room, something lurking at the edges of everyone's peripheral vision. I could feel the weight of it, like an invisible entity, circling through the rows of seats, dragging its presence across the red carpet. It was hard to explain, but it felt as if the entire theater had been transported to another place, a place where the rules of reality were beginning to distort. Minutes after the incident, I could hear the whispers growing more intense. People backstage were huddling together, speaking in hushed voices, trying to process what had happened. "Did you see his eyes?" a makeup artist whispered to a colleague. "That wasn't Will, that wasn't normal." Her colleague, equally pale, nodded in agreement. No one knew what to say or do. The slap had been something far deeper than anyone there was prepared to understand. I felt the same way. The man who stepped onto the stage and delivered that blow was not the Will Smith everyone knew. He seemed to be possessed by something older and more malevolent. But what terrified me even more was that the audience, most of the people there, seemed incapable of perceiving it. It was as if they were trapped in an illusion, unable to see the shadows spreading through the theater. I wondered, was I losing my sanity, or was I truly seeing the reality behind what had just happened? As the minutes dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that the presence I sensed was growing stronger. There was a heavy energy in the air, a vibration that made the ground tremble slightly beneath my feet. With every passing second, this invisible force seemed to gain more form, more substance. It wasn't just an abstract feeling anymore. It was real, something about to manifest in a physical way. The beast, I thought, is getting closer. I tried to step back, to distance myself from the confusion, but it felt as though my legs were rooted to the ground, as if gravity itself had intensified, pulling me down. I looked at the stage and saw that Chris Rock was trying to carry on, but there was something strange about his posture. He moved uncomfortably, as if an invisible force was holding him in place. His eyes were still wide, and he avoided looking directly at the audience, as if afraid of what he might see. And then I realized, it wasn't just a feeling. Something was changing, distorting around all of us. The walls of the theater seemed to stretch, the shadows elongating in impossible ways, as though the space around us was being warped by a force beyond comprehension. I was in the middle of something far greater than a simple awards ceremony. That night, the Oscars had transformed into an invisible battlefield between forces I couldn't fully understand. Backstage, a sound technician ran by, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "Something's wrong here," he shouted, but no one seemed to hear him. He ran for the exit, but before he could reach the door, he tripped and fell to the ground, gasping, as if something invisible had pulled him down. I saw the pure terror in his eyes. Was he seeing what I was seeing? The presence? The beast? As I tried to pull myself together, I heard a loud noise, almost a roar. It wasn't human. I looked at the stage again, and for a brief second, I saw the shadow of something that shouldn't exist. A gigantic creature, with misshapen contours and twisted horns, sliding through the shadows, as if waiting for its moment to fully reveal itself. The slap had been the catalyst, and now the beast was there, hungry for more. In the minutes that followed, the tension in the air became almost unbearable. The theater felt like a space on the verge of collapse, as though the walls were about to close in on us, crushing everything. The sensation of being watched, of standing in an invisible field of unknown forces, intensified. I could hardly believe what my eyes were seeing, but at the same time, something deep inside me knew it was real. The shadows moving through the Dolby Theater weren't natural. They weren't part of the usual play of light and dark we had seen so many times before in past events. They seemed conscious, alive. From my corner backstage, with my eyes fixed on the stage, I saw Will Smith sitting in his chair, his body relaxed, but still with that strange emptiness on his face. There was no remorse, no sign of regret, just a profound and disturbing void. It was as if the man the world knew had been consumed, as if his essence had been drained by something invisible, something that now inhabited his body. Next to him, Jada stared straight ahead, motionless like a statue, her eyes fixed on a point in the distance, oblivious to the silent chaos around her. The voices backstage grew louder. Anxious whispers, nervous murmurs from a crew who, like me, could feel the presence of something indescribable. The sound technician I had seen fall minutes earlier was now sitting against the wall, his eyes glazed over and his breath shallow. His lips were moving, mumbling something, disconnected words I couldn't understand, but they sounded like desperate prayers. Other members of the crew gathered in small groups, trying to make sense of what they were feeling. No one wanted to say it out loud, but everyone knew that something was terribly wrong. I looked at the stage again, and that's when I saw it. The shadow I had glimpsed earlier, that misshapen form moving at the edges of reality, began to materialize. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to the naked eye, but I could feel its presence growing, taking shape. The creature's outline started to become clearer, long, twisted horns that seemed to merge with the ceiling, gigantic arms, and claws that tore through the air around it. The beast was there. It wasn't a metaphor or a collective hallucination. It was real, and I could see it. The beast, this entity that had been mentioned in whispers, rumors, and Hollywood's hidden legends, was more than just a mythical figure. It was the embodiment of something ancient, a force that had been present since the birth of the film industry. There were vague, almost forgotten accounts of strange events backstage at major productions, inexplicable accidents, mysterious deaths. Now I understood. The beast had always been there, hidden in the shadows, feeding on the ambition, the ego, and the desire for fame that pulsed through Hollywood. As the creature took form, the entire theater seemed to respond to its presence. The ceiling, once majestic and illuminated, began to darken, as though the light itself was being drained into the encroaching darkness. The cameras, which had been focused on the faces of nominees and guests, were now malfunctioning, capturing distorted images, as if the technology itself were being corrupted by the beast's presence. The monitors flickered, showing brief glimpses of something horrific, something beyond human comprehension. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breathing becoming difficult. I wanted to flee, to get out of there as fast as I could, but my legs wouldn't respond. It was as if I were rooted to the floor, trapped by the sheer force of that terrible presence. I knew I was seeing something no one else should ever see. The beast, which had lingered in the shadows for so long, was now exposed, but it didn't seem worried. On the contrary, it was as if it had chosen to reveal itself, fully in control of that moment. Then, like muffled thunder, I heard a deep sound, a roar that didn't come from any human throat. It was a primitive, guttural sound, filled with indescribable malice. The audience, still blissfully unaware of the presence of this thing, began to shift uncomfortably, as if responding to something on a subconscious level. Some people started glancing at each other, confused, not understanding why they felt the growing discomfort. They couldn't see the beast, but they could feel it, like an invisible predator circling among them, whispering deep in their minds. I realized this was more than just a physical manifestation. The beast wasn't merely among us. It was infiltrating people's minds, corroding their perceptions, warping the reality around them. This wasn't just an awards show gone wrong. It was a ritual, an invocation that had been completed the moment the slap happened. The slap was just the beginning, the trigger that released something far larger and more terrifying. As I struggled to process what was happening, a chill ran through my body. I looked around, trying to find an escape, but the shadows now seemed denser, more oppressive. The beast's presence grew stronger with each passing second, and I knew we didn't have much time. Something was about to happen, something that would forever change the perception of reality, not just for those present, but for everyone watching the Oscars that night. As the night wore on, the sense of inevitability consumed me. There was no way out. I knew the beast was at its peak, ready to make its final move. The theater, once a symbol of glamour and celebration, had become a dark altar where the fate of all of us would be sealed. The tension in the air was almost unbearable, and I could see on the faces of the people around me that, even without fully understanding what was happening, they sensed that something was deeply wrong. Will Smith remained seated in his chair, motionless, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The absence of any emotion on his face was disturbing. He, who had been possessed by something, now seemed completely drained. The shadow of the beast hovered over him, as if observing its vassal after a completed mission. I felt a growing pressure in my chest, as though the very air was being sucked away from me, leaving a deadly vacuum all around. In a moment of pure desperation, I glanced toward the exits. The doors, once visible and inviting, now seemed distant, distorted by the shadows spreading rapidly. I knew that escaping was no longer an option. The beast had sealed the theater in some sort of supernatural bubble, where the normal rules of physics no longer applied. We were trapped in an invisible battleground, a place between our world and the realm of darkness. The silence in the theater was oppressive. Even the nervous applause and laughter had stopped. The entire audience seemed to be in a collective trance, unable to perceive that the very fabric of reality was unraveling around them. I tried with all my strength to understand what was about to happen. Something told me the beast wasn't satisfied with just manifesting. There was a greater purpose behind it all, something far beyond a mere spectacle of horror. And then I realized the beast wasn't there by chance. It had been summoned. This wasn't just a macabre coincidence. It was the result of an ancient pact, a deal made in the darkest corridors of Hollywood. The stories I'd heard, the whispers about sacrifices and hidden rituals, weren't just urban legends. They were real, and the beast was living proof that Hollywood's deepest secrets were buried in the darkest recesses of the human soul. The creature's presence seemed to grow with every second, as if it were feeding off the fear, confusion, and darkness that filled the theater. I knew the beast wouldn't leave easily. It had been summoned, and now it was ready to claim its tribute. The slap had been the final seal, the act that opened the door between worlds. And now, that creature was ready to take what belonged to it. My eyes turned again to Will. He was the key, the link to everything. He was no longer the charismatic actor everyone knew, the global star. He was the chosen one, the instrument through which the beast had manifested. But what terrified me even more was what came next. I knew the creature wouldn't stop with him. It wanted more. It wanted all of us. Backstage, chaos broke out. Some people ran toward the exits, desperate to escape, but they seemed unable to pass through the doors. Others remained frozen, completely lost in what was happening. I moved among them, trying to understand what could be done, but everything felt futile. The beast was in control, and we were mere pawns in its macabre game. Suddenly, the sound of something breaking echoed through the theater. The lights, one by one, began to flicker and go out. First, those closest to the stage. Then the rows at the back. Darkness quickly swallowed everything in its path. And then I heard the roar again. That deep, guttural sound, as if it had emerged from the depths of the earth, reverberated through the walls, making it clear that the beast was about to claim its prize. When the last light went out, I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet. The audience, which had been calm moments earlier, started to scream. The shadows became tangible, almost as if they were alive, enveloping each of us. I knew in that moment that the reality we knew was disintegrating. The beast was finally loose, and there was no turning back.